What's up, everybody? Here we go with another ep of Untangling Climate Finance. I'm Jay Tipton from Gordian Strategies. In this episode, I sit down with Sheri Hickok, the CEO of Climate Impact Partners. We explore her journey from an engineering career in the heart of Motor City, Detroit, to her role today, leading a global company that addresses some of the world's most pressing climate challenges. She shares how her background shaped her approach to climate solutions and how she now works closely with corporations and governments to drive meaningful environmental change. Sheri describes Climate Impact Partners' mission to reduce 1 billion tons of carbon emissions through innovative projects across 56 countries. One such project is their partnership with Form Ghana, a reforestation initiative that is not only removing carbon, but also creating sustainable jobs for local communities with a focus on empowering women. We talk about the role of the voluntary carbon market in advancing climate action, and Sheri also offers insights from their recent report on Fortune Global 500 companies, which is showing a growing commitment to net zero targets and using carbon credits, despite many external pressures being felt from corporates. But that's enough of the setup. Here's Sheri to tell you more. Hi, Sheri. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where are you calling in from?
I'm actually sitting in what may be surprising, but a rainy London.
Yes, very surprising. Never hear those two words in the same sentence. Okay, so let's start with the introductory things. So why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself, such as where you're from, career path, these kind of things.
Okay, well, I'm United States native, as my accent may give away, even though I'm calling in from London. Was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, the suburbs of Detroit, and grew up really in rural Midwest with horses and animals and three brothers and a dad. And so I climbed a lot of trees and was a pretty active, hands-on kid, and ended up studying mechanical engineering. And that took me into what Detroit is known best for, the automotive industry. And I spent 22 years at General Motors, and they were a great 22 years where I was able to grow up from being a test engineer to a chief engineer on some of the products you'll know well, like the full-size pickup, the Chevy Silverado, for example, and worked across supply chain and finally on our autonomous vehicles. But from there, I moved to renewable energy with General Electric. My kids joke, they say I was only able to change one letter in my email. And so that was the choices I had. I had to go from GM to GE. But there I just had another amazing 6 years where I was able to live around the world, Chicago, Singapore, Paris, and build out wind farms actually in countries all over the world outside of the US. And it was really such a great experience and a real honor to be on the ground in a lot of these locations. And then finally, now I'm here at Climate Impact Partners, where I just lead this tremendous team on taking the climate action we're trying to drive in partnership with our clients.
That's a great journey. I love that.
It is a great journey. I feel extremely blessed by the opportunities I've had and the places we've been able to live. I have 2 daughters and a husband, and the experiences they've all been able to have through this career progression makes it much more than a career, but it's really our life.
Yeah, no doubt. And our roots are neighbors because I'm from the northeast of Indiana.
Okay.
So we're not very far from Detroit where I grew up. And I have family kind of scattered all over Michigan. My aunt and uncle have been living in Holly, Michigan for, 20 years or something.
Oh, yes. I'm very familiar with the Holly Hotel and the tea they serve, which is quite a bit different than the tea I now have in London.
Yes, and also the tea you probably had in Asia as well. So
yeah, exactly.
That's cool. Well, nice. I love the very, very interesting trajectory that you've taken, which has brought you here. And so now let's circle it back to Climate Impact Partners. Why don't you elaborate more on the company?
Great. Well, I'm super blessed to lead this business, which is a 27-year-old company, and it's been around since the start of the carbon markets. And it's a formation or a merger of 2 companies, Natural Capital Partners and Climate Care, who have worked over the almost 3 decades with corporates and governments to design, implement, and fund carbon projects focused on reducing or removing carbon from the air. And to date, we will hit, well, we're already past actually 140 million tons of carbon that's been reduced or removed, and just a lot of other great stats behind those projects. Over 600 projects across 56 countries. And we do that by working with corporates that want to invest in activities beyond their value chain. And some of these corporates are big names that you would know, like Microsoft, Aviva, BCG, or Brooks. And we're working with them from the point of potentially setting their strategy on what's their glide path to either carbon neutral or net zero, whatever that may be, to project selection, what are the right projects for them to invest in, to actually reporting on their results. And so we put service at the heart of what we do, and that's in service to ultimately the climate, but through our corporate clients, government clients, our project partners, and our team members on the ground. And that's a little bit about us at CIP.
Thank you for that. And as you said, hundreds of projects. So if somebody were to navigate towards your website, they would see that you're extremely active. There's lots of projects. You guys are constantly putting out news updates. I was there, and in August, I saw that you had announced an agreement with Form Ghana to purchase over 370,000 high quality carbon removal credit from their afforestation and reforestation project. Now, like I said, you guys have tons. You said this as well, but why don't we just talk a little bit about that? Because it would be nice to zone in on one particular project. So why don't you elaborate on the Form Ghana, since that's a more recent project?
I'd be happy to. We love Form Ghana. Form Ghana, as you said, is an exclusive partnership we have. So there's an organization on the ground that's been implementing that project, which is reforestation across 2 locations in central Ghana. And I'll cover maybe 2 pieces. One, what does it mean to have an exclusive partnership and why we would do that? And 2, a little bit about Form Ghana. I'll start with the boring part first. So why do we have exclusive relationships? This really gives us the opportunity to get to know the project really well, to help us learn from the project partners and also share best practices that we've experienced across other projects around the world to really maximize the outcomes that project can achieve. Because fundamentally, we want 2 things. We want the project to do really well in its actual main activity, which is removing carbon from the air, aka the reforestation side. But 2, we want the project to be sustainable for the long term. And that's through ensuring that the project does well, which sustains the community. And that can be through a multitude of ways. So if we talk about those ways, I'll describe the more fun part, which is Form Ghana. This is a project, as we said, that has reforestation across central Ghana. It aims to reforest 20,000 hectares of degraded forest reserves over its lifetime, which results in more than 371,000 carbon removal credits, but that's what we're targeted at now. It's actually also created 1,000 jobs, with 40% of them being allocated to women in a community that has been fundamentally impacted by climate change, from the crops impacting the weathering events, which obviously impacts then the livelihood of the people. We have an amazing video that we've created to tell the story. And some of the pieces I love the most about that video are when community members talk about this is how they now can make sure their kids are getting good education. They can send them to school because they have a financial flows that they can depend on. And so, yes, the nuts and bolts are the carbon removal, but the real impact, I believe, is helping change these lives of people on the ground. And we'd be happy to share that video also if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, Jay.
Yeah, without a doubt. In fact, I will make sure that the link to the video is in the podcast show notes so any listener can find it there, but I will also send that out. And so clearly, carbon markets is a bread and butter part of what you all do. And as a part of that, you have a very strong voice. I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that if someone were to go to your website, they would see that Climate Impact Partners is very regularly publishing reports and thought pieces about what's going on in carbon markets. Recently, you published a report that's called Quiet Climate Action, Fortune Global 500 Climate Progress Continues. I thought that was very good, but I would like to hear you share some of the high-level takeaways from the report for the audience.
Yeah, actually, it was a great report this year. This is our 6th year doing a study on the Fortune Global 500, so the 500 largest global companies. And whereas last year we saw flat action year over year, This year, we actually saw an increase in the number of companies planning to be net zero by 2050. And not just a small increase, but actually up 6 percentage points. So up from 39% of the companies to 45, which is really quite a bit. And this is dramatically up from 2020, which was only 8%. So you can see how many more companies are leaning in and just year over year. And why we think this is so interesting is because we know we have been in a year where there's a lot of ESG backlash. There's a lot of economic pressure. There's a lot of noise around the world, a tough political environment. So to see that companies are still leaning in and making those commitments is fabulous. That said, we also saw that there aren't as many companies taking near-term commitments on board. And so what we would call a near-term commitment is by 2030. We need to reduce emissions by 42% by 2030. And under the current policies and the projections, we'll actually increase them by 3%. So this is a really tough message because just think, it's like a marathon, right? You don't just show up on the day of the race and run it. We can't just wait to 2050 and think we're going to have solutions for climate change. We actually need to be training every week, understanding what our nutrition is, understanding that plan every week, every month until we get to that race day. So we need to see more short-term, meaning 2030 targets and commitments.
Yeah, 2030 is just a few years away and 2050 will be here sooner than we know it. So of course, these intermediary targets are extremely important. As you said, the ecosystem right now is a little bit volatile. But I think that one of the big takeaways, and I would like to hear your analysis on it, it's often said by outsiders, I would say, that companies that actually purchase carbon credits, they view it as a get out of jail free card. But I believe what you guys pointed out is something that a lot of us that are inside the market know, is that actually companies that are purchasing carbon credits usually are more aligned and more, I would say, active with their decarbonization goals and their decarbonization targets. So can you kind of spell that out from what you heard back from the corporates that are buying credits and how just purchasing credits impacts their activity to try and decarbonize?
That is a really great observation, and I'm glad you pointed that out. So you're spot on. The data has shown that companies that are purchasing carbon credits are decarbonizing at twice the rate as companies that aren't. And what our study actually showed is 42% of the companies in the group we studied explicitly state they will use carbon credits to meet carbon neutral or net zero target, which is up from 40% last year. So again, in a time frame when there is more backlash and there is more, trying to flog the corporates that are leaning in, we're seeing that companies are continuing to explicitly state they do see a path for carbon credits. And they are raising their hand and putting that in print. We also found that companies that are committed to using carbon credits are twice as likely to have a near-term science-based target. So, talking about those near-term targets, it's really important. And we think the fundamental reason for this is companies that are spending money on carbon credits recognize it's not the end-all be-all. It's a pathway and it's a tool, but they need to abate also. And so this is why we believe that you see companies driving decarbonization faster, near-term targets more likely, because they recognize there is a real cost and they need to fundamentally have the most cost-efficient solution, both for the company and the climate. And that is taking some of these other actions too.
Yeah, I'm glad you laid it out that way, because for me, it just seems like so obvious, right? That if a company is going to invest resources and capital and time into carbon credits, likely, the buck's not going to stop there. They're going to take it a little bit further. And it's been kind of a shame. And I'm sure you feel the same way, that over this past year, the companies that have been engaging with the market have oftentimes been the ones receiving the most scrutiny. And it, to me, has always felt a little backwards.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think a lot of people think this. And, more of the language that I'm hearing now, and, maybe I want to believe my own story, is companies just need to be transparent, right? Say what you're doing, say why you're doing it. And if something doesn't go as planned, then say that. But I think we need to give companies space to do that and allow them to be transparent, because these companies are actually taking action that's voluntary, right? I think we forget that. We're trying to hold them to account for something that they're going above and beyond to take accountability for their residual emissions. And I think as long as companies continue to be transparent and own that narrative, you do see some of them that say, hey, we're just going to keep moving forward.
Yeah, without a doubt, I think that we often gloss over the word voluntary in this entire thing and don't give enough credit for companies that are actually taking action when it is not required for the vast majority of them to do. So definitely, I think it goes back to the point that it's like the fact that they are taking initiative in itself is very admirable. The next piece of this, and it continues in the sense that Climate Impact Partners sits at the very top and has a very great perspective of what's going on and is always like staying in the mix. At this point, all of our listeners and our newsletter subscribers are very familiar with the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, or ICVCM. Again, you guys have commented numerous times on the progress of ICVCM over the course of the couple years that they've been active, specifically in more recent times as they're making decisions regarding their core carbon principles and the categories that are getting either approved or rejected. And so I just want to start at the top and get your general feelings on how you believe ICVCM is performing so far in their mission.
It's a great question. I just maybe step back a step further, and you had asked me about my background, and I told you I started in automotive, and I'm a mechanical engineer, and I worked in supply chain there. And what I learned is how you create and execute quality systems. And quality systems are fundamentally built off of driving standardization and robust processes throughout whatever the process is, whatever the item it is you're trying to produce. And I think what's happening here, and I applaud it, is ICVCM is trying to help it from that perspective across the methodologies that we have in the market. So they're taking a step back to say, let's audit this process, which that's, you have a standards body, and the standards body issues methodologies, which is a bit like your blueprint for a project or how to create a project, to say, is this robust to meet certain criteria in today's day and age, today's environment? And they're finding some they think are robust and others that need to be tightened up. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing this at all. Where we're focused is at the project level, because we know that you can have a great standard, a great methodology, and still fail at the project level. And so we're focused on making sure we deliver to the methodology we designed to. Overall, I'm a pragmatist. If the work ICVCM is doing to audit and vet the methodologies helps to bring standardization and an improved execution that enables more trust in the market, I'm all for it, because at the end of the day, what we're focused on at Climate Impact Partners is how do we scale climate impact faster? How do we get more money flowing to the ground so we can impact more lives and do that while we're impacting this trajectory towards 2030 and 2050. So all in all, I don't really have a judgment on how ICVCM is doing. I do think that the work that they're doing, if it drives in more trust and integrity in the market, we welcome it.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not sure if any of the projects that you have implement methodologies that have been either approved or denied by ICVCM on the category level, but if so, have you seen this impact credit prices or credit deals that you have done at all?
So the short answer is no. We have not seen an impact on the demand or on the credits for non-CCP or rejected methodologies, but the big one for us is renewables. And fundamentally, what we continue to look at for the renewable projects in our portfolio, because new renewables aren't being issued because these methodologies haven't been in use for the last few years anyways, but we continue to look back at when these projects were issued, did they meet the thresholds of strict additionality? And that's how we're working with our own due diligence process as we focus on the project by project level.
As you said, the additionality specifically with the renewable energy projects, the conversation about like where is that project located in terms of which country, it impacts the additionality argument in a lot of ways, right? If this is a developing country versus a developed country, how the additionality fits into that particular project. It certainly isn't like a one size fits all solution for that, because of course, some countries really do rely on that extra financing from the carbon credits versus projects in more developed places. You can make the argument that much less so. So it is for sure a project by project basis, I would say, specifically with the renewable methodologies.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say too, there's a phase two of this that didn't get a lot of press when ICBCM did their announcement on renewables, and that's they're not saying there should never be renewables again, or renewables that are supported through carbon credits or carbon finance. But they are saying we need more robust ways to make sure we're vetting from an additionality perspective. So the next step is, and whether it's done on renewables or another methodology that may get rejected, is how do we take that methodology and strengthen it? Because I think we start to confuse a methodology not getting a CCP stamp with a project being bad. And that's not right. That's not the alignment here, or apples to apples. We want the most robust methodologies so that we can have the most confidence in projects that are coming through the systems. We will have this interim period where we may need to either revet projects or issue methodologies that are stronger and then revalidate projects against those. But that's all work yet to do now. I'd say we're still in the very early days of how this all plays out.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sheri. Yes, you're exactly right. We shouldn't consider it as like, oh, if a methodology or category were to get a reject and then the door is shut forever. It's saying, go back and improve this and make the case or the argument stronger, right? It's such a good point, because I often think that a lot of the reaction to these decisions is that's the end, especially if it's in a negative way. And of course, that's not it. It's just saying, back to the drawing board, let's improve.
That's right.
Okay, so Sheri, let's look towards the future and let's look towards scaling. As you had said before, you have an extremely extensive experience and expertise in renewables, which the explosion of renewables over the last decade or a little bit more has been extremely impressive. So from your perspective, what can the VCM learn from that industry and use to help scale the carbon markets?
Yes, Jay, I'm super passionate about this. I don't know if it was month one or month two, when I was first on the job, I thought and said out loud, this looks just like renewables. When you think about these large scale afforestation, reforestation type projects, it looks just like a wind farm. And that was where my experience was as building out these wind farms. And so what I'm really excited about to learn from, and we're doing this now, is essentially taking the PPA model, power purchase agreement, which is a long-term offtake from a wind or a solar farm or some type of renewable energy, to create demand, which fundamentally enables a wind project, in my experience, to be bankable, or have an investor come in and invest in that project. So we're modeling this now and actually you're seeing some of these start to execute in the carbon markets with these long-term offtake agreements, 20 plus years for carbon off of a nature-based removals type project. And by doing this, a couple other things happen, which is really important, which is we enable consistent demand. Right now in the carbon markets, as we all know, we have these stops and starts on the demand side for multiple reasons, okay? But when you have inconsistent demand, you cannot fundamentally build the underlying infrastructure that the industry needs to execute well. We're talking about quality and transparency and innovation in a market that doesn't know if it can have investment flows from one year to the next. Mm-hmm. And so we need to create stabilization for this market in order for it to scale. And so learning from the renewable side, this commercialization, building the infrastructure you need on the ground, and actually training and attracting the talent to execute is what I think we can really learn. And we're already starting to see it happen.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that your particular lens and being so involved in both of these markets is so beneficial here, because I think that what you just said, like, absolutely nailed it on the head. So good take there. Okay, so let's talk about climate impact partners in your future. So what can we expect from you all in the coming year?
So we are excited for the year to come. I mean, I'm excited most days anyways, just because of the work we get to do. But what you're going to see from us is more innovation, more growth from driving scale, operational excellence, and really a focus on reliable outcomes for our clients, whether that be corporates or governments. And, we're on a pathway to tripling our impact in the next 3 to 4 years and really heading towards our long-term goal of 1 billion tons emissions reductions. But we're going to do this through 3 primary lenses. One, continuing to serve corporates where they are at, and that's anything from spot and year to these long-term offtake agreements. Work with our government partners. We're partnering in the Article 6 arena where we're sitting between buy and sell side governments to really help develop these projects. And then 3, fundamentally using all of this experience from our 27 years of history to build out that operational execution that enables these projects to execute and operate well for the 25 and 35 years that they actually implement over. So a lot from us, but we're really driving that through investment in technology, talent, operations skill sets, and really just best in class on the ground execution.
Yes, very much looking forward to all of that. And will you be at COP coming up in the next couple of weeks?
I will be at COP. I am excited to be there. Will you be there?
I will not, no, but I will be reading everything on a daily basis from afar.
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting COP because there's not maybe as many people attending, but it may be interesting on which voices then are clearer.
I agree with you. And I think also kind of linking back to what you just said and some of the work you're doing specifically on Article 6, I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot more progress there this year because there's been some pretty big announcements in the last month about progress across Article 6.2 and 6.4. So if you're there, you're going to have a front row seat to that.
That's right.
All right, Sheri. So my last question, it's the same way that I wrap out every episode, and it comes from Epictetus, who was a great Stoic philosopher back in the day, 2,000 years ago. And he said, what concerns me is not the way things are, but the way people think things are. And so my question for you, which is a revision of that, is what do you think is one thing that must be done to change how people think about climate finance?
First of all, I love a good quote. So you have just hit a good note with me. I think the one thing that has to happen is we must take the V out of the VCM. This can no longer be optional. It can no longer be a voluntary conversation. We need regulation to lean in. We need standardization to lean in. And we fundamentally need to put a price on carbon where those contributing to the rise in emissions are taking accountability for their residual emissions. And we simply must do it faster. And I don't think we can do that if we keep calling it voluntary.
I love that response, Sheri. I literally have that same thought every single day. That's a huge part of the conversations I have is like, we got to cut the voluntary. So that was a brilliant answer. You're the first person that I've actually heard say that. And to me, it just seems so obvious. So thank you for saying that. I love it.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Keep echoing that in your conversations, which I'm sure you do.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for all your support. And we're all ears, open to hearing what we can do better and what the market can do better. And we're here to help scale because we fundamentally want to drive climate impact.
Thank you, Sheri. I appreciate you taking some time to join me today.
Thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure.
Always. Take care. And with that, we conclude today's episode. Big thanks to Sheri for joining and sharing her insights on carbon markets and corporate action. And of course, a big thanks to all of you amazing listeners for tuning in. Sheri introduced a few resources throughout the ep, including a video to the Forum Ghana project and Climate Impact Partners' annual Fortune Global 500 report. You can find links to all of them in the show notes, so just scroll there for access. And before you go, please make sure to subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you use Spotify, tap the little bell icon so you always know when a new episode drops. And don't forget to explore our other podcast content and check out our weekly newsletter Sliced for quick, digestible updates on carbon markets, climate finance, impact investment, and environmental protection. Do you have a question or just want to connect? Feel free to reach out to me at jtipton@gordianstrategies.com. My email is also in the show notes. All right, so catch you next month for another deep dive into climate finance. Until then, take care. This broadcast is brought to you by Gordian Strategies.